Bill Rosenberg. Dr. Bill Rosenberg is professor of political science at Drexel University. He is the co-author of numerous books on political rhetoric, like News Verdicts, the debates, and presidential campaigns. He joins us often and is doing so today on the day before election. He's tweeting at Dr. B. Rosenberg. Bill, welcome back. Thanks for being here this morning.
Good morning.
All excited?
Well, it's kind of like the day before the Super Bowl. You have all the analysts sitting around the big table talking about the strengths and weaknesses of different teams and making predictions. But what we have to recognize is that all the predictions in the world don't really amount to much because we have to look at what happens on the field the day of the game.
Exactly.
And tomorrow is the game.
Although there are some preliminary results, we've been seeing a huge increase in early voter turnout. Now, we saw an increase in the last presidential election, too. This is, I think, in some cases higher in some places than the number of actual people who voted in the last midterms, which may be an indicator that there's more interest in this midterm election than typically in a midterm election.
Well, I think we have to be a little bit cautious because early voting, which used to be sort of under the term absentee ballots, has become more and more prevalent. We live in a society that likes to be catered to, that has the opportunity to do things either online or at their own convenience. And as a result, this number has been gradually increasing. One of the things that I've seen often presented in the media is, for example, in Texas, how the number of people that have done early voting already exceeds the number that voted in midterms 4 years ago. The reality is that number doesn't really tell us that much. It tells us maybe that people are using that technique more. The reading of the tea leaves is it seems like there's a lot more young people doing it, and young people are more likely to vote Democratic. So, for example, in Texas, that's probably a good sign for O'Rourke. But at the end of the day, it is not just the early ballots, but all the ballots that have to be counted.
I wanted to get your sense of what polls mean, and I know that we've seen a lot of examples. We can look back at the 2016 presidential election. We can go back to Dewey defeats Truman. If you want to go back to 1948, right. And I know that you were very close to this decision in the 70s. Frank Rizzo had run for mayor for the second time, I guess, in Philadelphia. Predicting even up to the moment when you think the predictions are appropriate, it sometimes can be a dangerous game.
Well, I remember the election day in 2016 where I open up my copy of the New York Times online, and I see 82 or 86% likelihood in the upshot that Hillary Clinton's going to win the presidency. And I'm sure she saw that as well, and by the end of the day, it was sort of devastating news to all Democrats. The bottom line is that there are so many of these sort of processes, I'm going to call out there, that make it kind of confusing. There are regular polls that are gathering information, but sometimes they're done of likely voters, sometimes they're done of registered voters. There are polls that are done in particular states versus sort of national polls. And then there are also polls that are trying to do prediction, and that's kind of the difference between the art and science of public opinion polling, that ultimately there have been numerous studies that have taken a look at giving the same exact database to 4 very reputable survey research analysts. They come up with different answers about who's going to win and who's going to lose. And the reason is that there's a calculation of who are the likely voters. And likely voters ties into turnout. And depending upon who you get to the polls on election day with get out the vote and so forth, that's going to determine the ultimate outcome of an election. And you made a reference to Frank Rizzo in Philadelphia, which is interesting. I was early in my polling career. I was called in by the Philadelphia Inquirer because the Inquirer had done a really bad job in terms of a poll about Frank Rizzo running for mayor. And at the end of the day, Rizzo held up this poll result that was a headline in the Philadelphia Inquirer and basically said the only poll that counts is the election. And the reason for that was it was not really done to the methodological rigor that it needed to be done. I was brought in to do this, but at the same time, the newspapers put a big hang over a noose around my head and said, because we had this embarrassment last time, you can do the poll and you can do it as well as you want. but we're not going to let you poll within a week of the election. So we can always claim that people changed their mind. So we've come a long way since the mid-1970s.
That was the infamous Bill Rosenberg CYA poll, correct? Is that what?
There you go. So that was not my choice. I was actually quite frustrated by it, but that's the way that the media wanted to cover it. And I think we're facing those types of things today with a plethora of polls. Each one of them is doing it in a different way, using different calculations. And as a result, we also have an increase in terms of polarization where perhaps some people are part of either the blue wave or the red wave and are not necessarily answering in the most truthful way.
Yeah. Well, you were young. You were trying to get your career started, so I understand. I also, by the way, I was talking to my son. I was thinking about this. 2010. Obviously, Republicans took over, huge wave. That was a red wave, no question about it. Mm-hmm. But the Democrats still maintained the majority in the Senate. And, of course, the Republicans took the majority in the House, and we had a Democrat in the White House. And this time around, there's a good possibility. It's not a probability. It is a probability, but it's not a done deal. The Democrats will take over the House. Republicans will wind up keeping their majority in the Senate. And with the changes in rules, the only thing they won't be able to do is stop a filibuster of legislation because they don't have 60. And, of course, they'll have a Republican in the White House. And what my son was saying, he says it's like an old West Wing episode where they said, wait, we spent $20 billion and we're winding up in the same place. I mean, we are going to have more than likely divided government again.
Well, one of the things that I think is actually transpiring is that even though we see Donald Trump running around the country, as all presidents do, to try and build up support for his party's candidates in midterm elections, in many ways, I think in Donald Trump's true heart or mind, he doesn't really care what happens with the House. He wins either way. If the House is taken by the Democrats, then he can blame the Democrats for everything that does not happen, that they're the obstructionists, they're the ones that won't let us do the things, quote, we need to do, and it'll be a great sort of opportunity for him to continue the type of rhetoric that he uses. If the House stays Republican, he wins also, because then he can claim that this was an electoral mandate, that even though we've been hearing all this discussion about the rising blue wave and sort of the antagonism to my administration, Donald Trump would say, we won, okay? He's nationalized the election to be about himself. And if he ends up having the House become Republican again, that's going to be almost like a electoral mandate that he's going to wave in front of the American people and the people all over the world for the next 2 years. So in a sense, Trump really can't lose tomorrow. The issue is if you want Democrats in, that may make a difference. And in fact, the Democrats winning the House, if they do so, will be a thorn in his side, because all the committee chairmanships will then become held by Democrats, the investigative power, the subpoena power, and so forth, which will make it more difficult. But at the same time, Donald Trump can just basically say, well, there's this tag team between the fake media and these liberal Democrats, and they're just obfuscating what's really going on, and we need to do the work that America needs to have done.
And, of course, Democrats will not, like Republicans, overreach if they do get a mandate in the House. They will not go too far, right? I mean...
Well, the reality is that there have been calls for impeachment.
I know.
What you're going for about a year and a half now. The bottom line is that you've noticed that the House Democrats are not campaigning on anything like that. When they're asked the question, they go, no, no, no. And the reason, essentially, is it's a kind of a losing proposition, because unless they have the votes in the Senate to actually impeach him, it becomes kind of an embarrassment game. It doesn't really change the lay of the land, that even if he is impeached by the House, he's not going to get convicted probably by the Senate unless something really devastating comes out, where we have a situation like Richard Nixon in the 1970s, where he basically saw impeachment coming and conviction likely and then decided to resign.
We'll see how it turns out after tomorrow. Bill, thanks as always.
Have a great day. Dr.
William Rosenberg, professor of political science at Drexel University, joining us, his thoughts on the upcoming election, the midterms. He is tweeting at Dr. B. Rosenberg, B-R-O-S-E-N-B-E-R-G.